Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs and our Distinguished Speakers Program this evening with Dr. Lawrence Schuette from Lockheed Martin Corporation. He is the person in Lockheed Martin Corporation who's responsible for being aware of and understanding what's going on in science and technology, not only across the United States, but globally as well. If there is something bubbling up out there in science and technology anywhere in the world, it's Dr. Schuette's responsibility for Lockheed Martin to be aware of that and to assess what its implications are for U.S. national security and obviously for Lockheed Martin Corporation as well. Now, tonight, he's not representing Lockheed Martin Corporation. He's here to make us smart about some of the issues this country faces today in science and technology. Before he joined Lockheed Martin Corporation, he worked for the U.S. government for 33 years. And the last 11 years of that, he operated at the Senior Executive Service level, SES level. And for those of you who are not familiar with what SES means, an SES is the civilian equivalent of an admiral or a general. So Dr. Schuette was at the highest levels of civilian populace in terms of science and technology. He was the Director of Research at the Office of Naval Research, Director of Research at ONR, and he managed a $1 billion a year budget of both advanced technology and for the Department of the Navy. At one point also, he was responsible for the entire Department of the Navy for the science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM program, to ensure that the Navy and Marine Corps were recruiting the right talent across the STEM system. He is a graduate of Catholic University of the United States. He took his bachelor's degree there, his master's degree there, and his PhD. Dr. Schuette is local talent. With that, Dr. Schuette, welcome to the Baltimore Council.
Good evening, everybody. I really am sorry that we're not meeting together at the World Trade headquarters downtown, and I look forward to perhaps coming back. I will say that you have General Vodal coming. That is a gentleman who understands foreign affairs and technology, and hopefully somebody will question him about his time in the Joint IED Task Force that he ran.
Good.
And I happen to have the privilege of working for him. He wouldn't know me from Shinola, but he's a great American. And it really is an honor to be here tonight. And I congratulate Dr. Byrd on 40 years. And obviously, Acting President Robbie Harris has invited me to speak tonight. And I'm really excited because I think this is a great topic. And it's that intersection of technology and foreign affairs. And Robbie schooled me on what we were looking for this evening, so hopefully I'll deliver. I do have to emphasize that these are my personal remarks and not those of my employer, but perhaps they should be. I don't know. We'll see. Nonetheless, you've really seen a wide range of speakers over the last few years. I went and looked at your website. Whoever's doing the website does a great job. And it's really clear that you're fully engaged, even through COVID, in the realities of foreign affairs in the 21st century. And congratulations on that. I wanted to speak tonight about technology and emerging technology and the rate of technology development, deployment, and acceptance just continues to increase. I suspect this was the same in the 15th century, but for now, since this is where we live, I see both the first and second derivatives of technology innovation are both positive, and we see technology trends that seemed improbable but are now likely to be realized in the near future, and we must come to terms with what those mean as individuals, but also as a nation and our nation among fellow nations. And we see them, these trends across every technical discipline. And tonight I thought we would spend some time looking at those implications on these accelerating enhancements. But I wanted to focus on a few areas, and we can tease some of these out, of digital, power and energy, climate control, climate change, and synthetic and engineered biology, which I think is a really important area, not a traditional strength of the Department of Defense, but something which is just playing out in real time in the news every day. Many of these are continuations of prior innovations, so it's really hard to see why this is such a big deal till you look backward a little bit. But many are truly science fiction that are turning into science fact. And it's that science fact that just makes it so exciting. So why do nations adopt technology? Clearly, whether you're a nation or a company or even an individual, we adopt new technologies to achieve some form of competitive advantage. So new running shoes, new warships, new milling machines perhaps, all provide some form of competitive advantage from which, if you're a country, hopefully you provide long-term stability for your country and your people. And I know that you're well schooled in foreign affairs, so I'm trying to distill this down to my little simple terms as an engineer, but I see these technologies and how they play out across the spectrum of foreign affairs, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So hopefully we can have a discussion. There is a chat window. If we were in person, I would be pointing to people. I would have gone and asked in advance, could you ask me a question? So I did that with Robbie already. So we're going to have at least 2 questions, so I'm excited. But I'd love to discuss these technologies and their potential impacts. And so some questions for us to ponder tonight, are there cultural barriers that would make technology innovations have different adoption rates around the world? So the world is flat technically. What matters now is how that technology is adopted. Are we going to be the first to invent, but the last to field? What's the impact of those self-imposed barriers to acceptance? What is the economic disadvantage, perhaps, of not embracing a technology? Or maybe there's an advantage to not embracing the technology. Maybe it's a technology dead end, and we're better off not going down that path yet. And then, of course, how will these technologies impact foreign affairs and international relations? I'd like to tease this talk just a little bit with an event that occurred on Friday, January 7th, at the University of Maryland Hospital in Baltimore, and it was the first xenotransplant of a pig's heart into a human. And as somebody that spent 6 years at the NIH, and a little bit of background in this area, I am so proud of the team and the efforts that they made, and we'll talk about some engineered biology later tonight. But this was a subject of a Michael Crichton thriller from 2006 called Next, I believe, where the protagonist received a kidney from an animal that had been DNA engineered to look like him so that it wouldn't be rejected. And that was science fiction. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is the reality of today. So 15 years later, we have taken science fiction and turned it into science fact. Really just an impressive achievement. Somebody's getting a Nobel Prize for medicine for that, I'm sure, eventually. But I would just say, I don't know if dinosaurs will be roaming again in Maryland in 2032, but it's clear the clock is ticking. So with that, I'd like to divide this talk into 3 parts. Some thoughts on international relations and where technology can have an impact. Prior technology advancements and their impact on foreign affairs. And this is because my love of history and everything has a precedent. I like to understand where we've come from so we can project that future impact. And then a discussion on these emerging technologies with some observations and speculations and hopefully a discussion around that impact. I'm obviously happy to take questions during the talk and after the talk. And Robbie has assured me I'll leave sufficient time for a robust discussion. So let's talk about foreign affairs. My understanding of foreign affairs has been heavily influenced by John Mearsheimer, who I noticed you heard from in November of 2020. He comes and speaks to Seminar 21, which I happen to be a member of in my time in DoD. And I really appreciated his thinking with his clear-cut realist school of international relations. It's very satisfying to a non-poker playing engineer that everyone's cards are up, everyone is doing what they should be doing for their nation to the maximum of their ability, assuming that everybody else is going to do the same. And whether this is true or not, it's easy to rationalize a world where everyone is doing all that is possible for their country, and you can figure out, well, we're going to do the same. And I think that works well if you're thinking in simplistic terms about foreign affairs, because obviously it's much more nuanced than that. But why do countries engage in foreign affairs? And what drives nation states to trade, to secure borders, and to expand influence? Well, the other way to look at it is, what if they didn't? They would disappear. And so if economic policy and diplomatic policy and military policy and financial policies are all linked together to national security, then technologies that provide advantage in any of these can create a national advantage. And as we can plainly see, national power, especially today, is way more than just military power. And so we'll talk a little bit about those technologies that are inherently dual use. But it's at basic level, foreign affairs is about securing near-term and far-term security in food, in energy, and in national stability. Because if you're a leader, you'd like to be there for a while, you need to provide your people those things. A chicken in every pot was a phrase from the 1920s, but in reality, it came from 17th century France, where King Henry IV wished his people would enjoy a chicken every Sunday. So that economic security, those calorie security, has always been important. And trade allows for that exchange of goods and energy and calories. And you clearly need to have reliable trade partners and trade routes, which of course is a reason to have a nation state's military system. I think it's hard for us in the U.S. to think about a calorie-denied environment, but clearly that is what the world faced for most of its history, and most of the world today is in a calorie-constrained environment. China imports 50% of its calories, 70% of its protein. I think we understand what they're thinking about in leadership positions there every night, making sure their people are fed, and that drives certain behaviors. So having spent a career developing game-changing military technologies, it's clear that we do those to create technological advantage. And there's always been an exchange between commercial and military and vice versa. So the first airplanes were designed for the military, obviously quickly became commercial. The first railroads were designed for commercial use, but were used very heavily for military application, and back and forth. And the technologies that provide economic and diplomatic or military advantage to one nation state over others will be valued and matured. Technology investments can reduce the cost of maintaining an army. Nuclear weapons post-World War II provided some of that. More importantly, they're a critical trade element. So we trade with our friends, our military technologies. That encumbers them into our world, but it also gives them a competitive advantage and makes us look stronger by having our partners fighting with us, if you will, working with us, using those technologies. And also, it's obviously, if I have to compete against a system that has large technical advantages, I got to work even harder and spend even more effort doing it. And so I think there really is that strong relationship between technology and foreign affairs, and this is why emerging technologies will always be important to the nation, because without that competitive advantage, you're just going to fall further behind. So we think in terms of 4 industrial revolutions. We're entering the 4th industrial revolution right now, and we're going to talk about that. But I think the first 3 were kind of interesting. The first industrial revolution, the 1760 to 1830, gave us factories, automated production lines, factories powered by water, then by steam, first by wood, then by coal. The first systematic use of fertilizer. So all of a sudden food was more affordable and easier to grow. And the steam-powered printing press provided cheap mass communication. So now you could distribute orders, you could distribute communications, you could maintain your nation, and you could influence others by being able to print newspapers and ship them around the globe. Interestingly, the London Stock Exchange was the first crowdsourcing of financing and spread the risk, spread the wealth, truly a business innovation that we've leveraged since. Those increased distances, you started to see things like the Monroe Doctrine, maintaining influence on our hemisphere, and the need to control sea lanes and the means of trade to ensure reliable calories, minerals, and other goods. The second industrial revolution, 1870 to 1914, brought increased efficiencies. We switched from coal to oil. Telegraph was replaced by the telephone. Gas lighting was replaced by electricity. The Bessemer process brought us steel, which allowed us to make larger ships more affordable, so they could carry more goods, could carry more guns. Nitrocellulose, smokeless powder, allowed you to make larger guns that were auto-loading. And then probably the biggest invention that we don't even really think about was the Haber process of Fritz Haber in 1910, figured out how to make fertilizer in a factory. Instead of using Chilean nitrate, Fritz Haber, basically the process that he invented to create fertilizer is the process we use today. It feeds 2/3 of the world with his process. I would note he was also the father of chemical warfare. So, there's a good side and a bad side there, but that really was a tremendous innovation akin to flight. I think from a foreign affairs perspective, we saw the decoupling of technology, or decoupled critical goods from trade. I can now make my own goods because I had these technological innovations. I didn't need to get Chilean nitrate. I have my factories building nitrate for me. I think this is where you saw Mahan in 1890 in the theory of sea power, recognizing we need to control the sea lanes. This goes on in through World War II. Post-World War II, we've entered the third industrial revolution, a technology that truly changed the game, and changed the game for Baltimore, was the box, the container ship. You think about what Baltimore was like and what ports were like and what commercial shipping trade was like pre-container ship. Stevedores, hand unloading, ships in port for weeks. This really hand-rolled distribution. The box changed everything. The box made the world flat. Now I can ship from China to the U.S. As quickly as I can get it across the United States by train, and for the cost, effectively that same cost. And so no longer is distance a criteria for my global supply chain. And the internet has enabled that global supply chain, and we've created this foreign affair relationship that's really the frenemy. Are they friends or are they enemies? We're deeply embedded with China from a trade perspective, but we're very concerned about their regional hegemony and their desires potentially for more than that. And certainly we read this every day in the paper. But we're clearly working with them. We're clearly making movies, playing basketball, buying shoes, etc., and goods. And we were trading with them because of inventions like the internet and the container ship, which allow that to occur. Also note that our caloric needs are easily met. And so we're not really fixated on where our next meal is going to come from in the main in this country. And that makes it much easier for us. Our life expectancy has continued to grow, and trade agreements and the internet We have these global supply chains with these global multinational companies, and that really has created a very interesting environment for countries and for companies. Do the nation states influence the companies, or is it vice versa? Who's in charge? And is that a dynamic that's different today than, say, 70 years ago? And I think we think back, we can think of Henry Ford and General Motors and their relationships with the Axis countries, but it's difficult to imagine that it was the same as it is today. So let's think about then these new emerging technologies. Every technology company, every university have their annual emerging technology lists. See a lot of biotech, especially in its COVID environment. The biotech and the mRNA vaccine, very exciting, a DARPA innovation that just in time, I think. But also artificial intelligence, something that's been around since the 1950s when the Office of Naval Research funded MIT's first AI grant. But we've now see it as it's here, and it's really exploding in its use. Machine learning, a form of artificial intelligence, digital twins, advanced manufacturing, autonomous vehicles, man-machine teaming, all making just tremendous advances on the home front, on the commercial exchange front, foreign investment, and then on the military front. And they've all had this decades of investment where if you're really schooled in an area, you recognize where it actually emerged. But I think when it shows up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or on the front page of the Washington Post, then we have to admit that it's truly out in the open and it's emerged, and we're starting to see those. And this visibly integrated economic, diplomatic, and military force ecosystem, well, they're all linked with carrots and sticks interchangeably applied across the spectrum. These emerging technologies allow us to put levers in where we can influence the military of some place by being part of their finance system. Right? That we have trade embargoes, we have the ability to sanction. These are not kinetic actions, but because we have such an awareness of what's going on, we can apply them very artfully. And I think there is a form of warfare that has emerged in the last decade that people coin fait accompli warfare. And that's a warfare where the nation makes a rapid move, they settle in, and then they make the cost of somebody coming in and reversing that move very expensive. And so think of Crimea. All of a sudden the Russians are there. How are you going to get them out? It can be very expensive to go get them out. The Chinese have built islands in the South China Sea. We're here. What are you going to do about it? You want to remove us from this, we're going to make it very expensive. And you can see other examples, the conflicts on the China-India border, what's going on in Hong Kong, the recent discussions and airplane flights over Taiwan, and it's in the front page of the paper every day. These are moves that would occur where the cost of reversing it would be exceedingly expensive. And that starts to change your strategy. It's a reaction to the U.S.'s strategy, and technologies are there to assist with some of that. Perhaps we can talk about that. But I wanted to talk about technologies I think of them in really four buckets. This hyperconnectivity, where everything is connected to everything else. You go buy a refrigerator and they want it to have an internet tap. My dishwasher could have an internet tap. I'm not sure I want my dishwasher and my refrigerator talking. I know I don't want my grocery store talking to my health company. And so all of this is interconnected. And it's continuing, and we're starting to see things like the Internet of Things, 5G, 6G, the metaverse, And then one I think that is really going to have profound impacts on foreign affairs is Starlink, the Elon Musk satellite-based constellation for internet. And it isn't going to matter here in Annapolis, where we are tonight, or in Baltimore, but if you bought a ranch in Montana, that's probably how you're going to get internet. More importantly, if you're a dissident in Iran or in China or in an area where you don't want people to know what you're doing on the internet, Starlink is going to be the answer. And I have to believe, and I saw some articles in the paper where the Chinese were very upset about Starlink because they had to move their space station. But it was pointed out that those 40,000 satellites could be low Earth orbit ASATs, right? But more importantly than that, they are a, if you will, information campaign opportunity that is just profound. And there's something out there called Tor, T-O-R. It's a virtualization system that people in foreign countries use to hide where they're coming from so they can get to the internet. It's actually developed by the Naval Research Lab in Anacostia, where I used to work. And it's a very powerful tool for dissidents. Starlink is going to be equivalent to that. So this hyperconnectivity is enabled by advances in material science. And so there's a term of art that I thought I would share, which is the graphene diamond. So graphene diamond substrates are the next generation of ultra-wide bandgap transistors. So we have, as an electrical engineer, we have normal transistors, and you have wide bandgap transistors, which are what we find in cell phone towers today. Ultra-wide bandgap exists in theory. It exists in little pieces. It hasn't been realized yet. But ultra-wide bandgap will give us that next generation. It's emerging. It's going to be there. And it really is spectacular in terms of bandwidth and efficiencies. And that's what DARPA is spending their research dollars on, as is the service organizations and the National Science Foundation. So this is allowing communication at a global scale. It's allowing coordination on the assembly line, between factories. For the military, it has profound impact on how we communicate and how we fight, having this hyperconnectivity. And it's just so exciting. So hyperconnectivity is enabling hyper-awareness. So I'm communicating, but what am I going to communicate to? Well, now I can put sensors everywhere. So how much ice cream do I have in my refrigerator? When was the last time the oil was changed in my car? So that the automobile manufacturer can contact me, or somebody can call me about my extended warranty. But really, it's for things like a transparent ocean. So we worry about seismic events. This allows us to have an ocean that is not opaque. We're going to have sensors across the Arctic, across the battlefield, all connected. And then through the use of quantum computers and neuromorphic computing and quantum sensing, all with an AI envelope around it, now we have total awareness. We have computers making decisions and making suggestions based on all of that data and enabled by all that connectivity. And this is already having impacts in crop efficiency and in plant yields from factories, and it's going to have a huge impact on the military as we team with unmanned systems or as we are supported by unmanned systems. And you start to see large unmanned surface vessels. In Norway, you see commercial ships that are unmanned, and we're going to see a commercial side, the efficiencies of an unmanned ship, but also on the military side, those unmanned systems, drones. I don't know how many of you have been impacted by a neighbor's quadcopter, but they're coming, and they're coming for you, to watch you. And that is just going to be out there in a far more ubiquitous manner as companies and countries harness those sensors to understand what's going on. And I think the quantum computing, where we're exploiting atomic scale physics, is really the next generation of computing. It's coming. Quantum encryption, where we have unbreakable algorithms, is coming. And then quantum sensing, where, how many of you have driven in your car and you go in the Baltimore tunnel, or you go between two buildings and your GPS loses lock? And it never happens to me when I know where I am. It only happens to me when I'm relying on it. Well, quantum sensing would allow us to build something the size of your cell phone that knows where you are based on inertial navigation using this atomic physics. And it's coming. And it's going to be out there and eventually will be affordable by all of us, that now when you drive through San Francisco and you're lost, it won't be. And I'm actually very excited about that. For AI, we hear about it, we've seen the movies. I suggest, if you haven't already looked at a software package called Grammarly, take a look. Grammarly is an AI-enabled word processor.
And AI stands for?
Artificial intelligence. Thank you, Robbie. I'm sorry. And so this is the word processor for people who can't spell, and obviously Word spell check does pretty well. But Grammarly goes through and says, you've used this word too many times. I'm going to switch these words up for you. What do you think? This sentence would be much more impactful if you reorganized it. What do you think? And I asked my one of my daughters, who's a senior in high school, who's spelling challenged. I'm like, so you ever use Grammarly? Oh, all the time, Dad. Only the demo versions, but if you wanted to buy me a version, I would really like it. And so I say this because it's clearly emerging and it's coming. And it's now smart enough to be useful. Well, if it's useful at the personal level, it will be useful at the corporate level, it will be useful at the national level. So imagine if we actually had a tool that could write real contracts that were actually readable and enforceable. It's coming, and it's actually pretty exciting. So I think the next piece that I wanted to talk about was the climate conscious and the climate aware power and energy opportunities that are coming. And I'm mindful of my time here, but the three things that I think are coming that aren't on the radar of green energy, where we see a lot of work in photovoltaic and a lot of work in wind and water turbine and other areas. I wanted to mention space-based beam power, fusion, and then these new compact fission reactors that are coming out. They finally, NuScale got theirs approved by the National Energy Regulatory Commission. So that's a huge step forward for NuScale. Fusion, the power of the sun. It was always 50 years away. I think now we see work at MIT and others. Maybe it's only 25. It's clearly hard to do. It's clearly almost here, but it's coming. Space-based beam power, put your photovoltaic cells in space. Convert the energy to radio frequency energy like in your microwave down to an antenna farm on the ground, and now you have power that is 24/7 weather independent. Well, this is where China has to go, and they're going there because they import quite a bit of their energy. And they'd like to be energy conscious, but they need a stable base power, and so do we. But they got a lot of room, and they've got a lot of desire to decouple from the international energy market, or at least have that stability that they need. And so they're looking at space-based power is actually something that the Naval Research Lab looked at, and we demoed from the International Space Station in small scale to prove it would work. And it's something that we've looked at, so we understand it. Now it's just a cost price point. Well, if you can get the price of putting things into space down, then that starts to look attractive, perhaps. Certainly if you want stable green power without fusion or fission, that's a great way to get it. I think the alignments of large corporations the national government, non-governmental organizations and government sponsors, we've shifted the Overton window on climate change. Green energy is no longer a far future goal. It's something we're going to do. So lastly, I just wanted to mention synthetic biology. I mentioned previously this first pig to human heart transplant. The other one is vat-based meat. Remember I mentioned that China imports 70% of its protein. They don't have the room or the resources to grow sufficient protein. Pig, they like pork. But what if they could grow it in a vat? What if they could create effectively what we've heard the term pink slime? What if they could grow that vat-based meat and effectively make pork sausage in a vat, in a factory, with very high efficiency, and it is pork. Well, this decouples them from the international pork trade, where they buy from the U.S. every month a record-setting number of pigs. This would allow them to get out of that sea trade that they are so dependent on right now for that protein. And I think where we wouldn't be looking at it, perhaps, I think this is something that will be seen as very attractive around the world, where calories matter and where protein matters. I also think that SynBio has the potential to create superhumans, both strength-wise, but also intelligence, also dependability. How bioethicists handle this is, I think, it's going to be on a country-by-country basis. So would we adopt in this country these kinds of genetic modifications? It's hard to imagine. I can see where we would cure cancer, perform these kinds of xenotransplants and xenomorphic modifications, heavily regulated. I'm not sure those regulations are going to be the same. And thus, if you wanted a competitive advantage, would you move elsewhere temporarily to have those changes made? And are they going to deliberately alter humans for these super special forces? Or what I always wanted were employees that worked as hard the first hour all the way through to the end of the shift. Imagine a command and control center or a watch area where everyone is paying attention the entire time and everyone is contributing. It's coming. And how we handle that as a nation and what we allow other people to do is going to be a challenge. So with that, I think I'll wrap up. I'd like you to think about, what's your favorite innovation? I think mine is the fact that if I have a question, I can go to Google or an internet search engine. I don't even really have to be able to spell it, and I can get an answer. And I think about what it was like for Albert Einstein. If he had a question, he would go to the library, he would pull out a book, he would pull out a magazine, a journal, and he would research it, and he would come up with an answer. And so something that takes me 20 seconds could take him half a day. I think that's just remarkable. And I think it's one of the reasons we're seeing these rapid advances in technology is we have such an aggregate understanding of that knowledge. I look forward, hopefully, to some questions other than the two that Robbie's going to give. And if not, we can talk about blockchain and cryptocurrency and the impact of decentralized banking on global affairs. Anyway, thank you very much.
Larry, thank you very much. A couple of questions, and these are odd given the briefing that you just gave us. We read often comments like, well, during the Cold War, DOD developed most of the leading technologies. And the private sector fell in behind that and adopted those technologies and what have you. But since the end of the Cold War, DOD is no longer making those sorts of investments in technology and in basic science. So I guess the question is the private sector rising to the occasion or not?
So Robbie, thank you. First off, I was thinking about it, and in World War II, all of the electronics that were on those airplanes, the radars, the command and control, the fire control systems, those were all designed by commercial companies, principally radio manufacturers and TV manufacturers that were pulled into the war. So I think the commercial role there was pretty strong. I think today, I said it earlier, the DoD is the first to invent, but we're the last to field. And much of the commercial innovation is enabled by the U.S. government's investment through National Science Foundation, ONR, our Office of Naval Research, Army Research Office, DARPA, AFOSR, Air Force Office Scientific Research. And they're investing heavily in university research. And those researchers are publishing papers. And the military has the ability to take that research and do something with it. But the commercial sector also can take that research and do something with it. And so you see things like self-driving cars. All of that base research was funded by DoD. All of that. But the commercial companies have taken it and done so much more with it, which is as it should be. We're trying to get this for national advantage. Commercial advantage is national advantage. It doesn't just have to be the military. But I think the military was there at the beginning. What do you got, Chip?
The bad thing was, as I was coming up, you answered the second question already. So I have to go back to my first question. And you talked through in the presentation this evening about the impact of technology advancements and international relations. And we talked a little bit about the pork being one of the examples of how you might blunt. Could you talk a little bit more about? You talked a little bit about it. Could you talk a little bit more about how technologies, or what technologies specifically, might be impactful if you were negotiating with an adversary?
So I think the artificial intelligence is going to be the true game changer, and it's enabled by the hyperconnectivity and this total awareness and the data that we have. But it's going to be artificial intelligence making better decisions. Arleigh Burke, very famous naval commander. Somebody asked him one time the difference between a good commander and a great commander. And he thought about it for a few seconds and said, about 10 seconds. And so there are times when seconds matter in decision making, and in particular in military affairs and in diplomacy. So what if you were at the negotiating table and you had your entire simulation going in the background that was modeling your terms, their terms, almost like a chess game and where it's going. And I have to believe this is going on. Certainly they're doing it in their head. What if they were doing it with an AI system? What if they had Deep Blue working their diplomacy for them? And I think that's going to be a game changer.
Larry, we hear and we read the folks out in Silicon Valley are hesitant or pushing back on doing business with DoD. And what I read is the people in Silicon Valley feel that DoD, and for that matter the U.S. government, is too stodgy, status quo, hard to deal with, terribly, terribly bureaucratic. How real is that, and is that a problem?
So as a former government employee, it pains me to say that yes, working with the government is hard. The government does quite a bit to try to make it simpler, and every time we try to do something to make it simpler, we occasionally make it harder. But it's the taxpayers' money. And I think the mandate from Congress is to be fiscally conservative and very aware and judicious with the taxpayers' dollars. This is where I think actually AI could be very helpful. I think some of the challenges that we have with putting contracts in place quickly is a lack of clarity in the language of how the contract was written, the expectations for that contract. And so I think there's really an opportunity. I look at some of these AI tools that are out there, provided by large companies like Microsoft. Like, wow, I know what I want that for. I want that to go through and do a DCMA audit for me automatically. And I think those tools are coming, and that will fix that. But it's the taxpayers' money. I think Congress would look askance if it was wasted.
We're going to combine a couple of questions into one single, and I'll see if I can do this
Sure.
clearly. The questions revolve around the international aspect of global innovation, one of the things on your title. And the questioners were asking, do you see other countries investing in science and research like the U.S. does? Historically, we've always seen the U.S. as being ahead of the game, ahead of the competition internationally. Is that eroding, and do you see other countries investing, or are there areas of specific improvements one by one?
So obviously, it's international science and technology. The world is flat. And there's no question that countries that have a lot of people and a lot of money like China are investing very heavily in science and technology. And they're picking key areas like we would to invest heavily in those areas. I think when I travel the world, what I'm amazed by is how U.S.-centric the world's universities actually are. And if they're not U.S.-centric, they're UK-centric. And if they're not UK-centric, then they're EU-centric. And so when I travel, what I find, I will see an Office of Naval Research global coin in the president's office at the university. And when I talk to the faculty, they got their PhDs at our top universities. So it'll be an MIT professor, and this happened to me when I was in Korea. The MIT professor who South Korean professor who got his PhD at MIT, he was sending his grad students to MIT for winter break to work with his advisor, to get them on a peer-reviewed paper with an MIT professor. Same thing at the next university with the Stanford professor. And so those linkages back to the U.S. universities are really important. The danger is, for the U.S., as we make it harder to come to the U.S., and as we make it more uncertain, so COVID actually, as a pandemic, has had a lot of impacts. One of them is, if you come to the U.S. from China, from anywhere, it could be as much as 10 years. Right? You're going to come at least for undergraduate and grad school. That's 10 years. So you want to go someplace where it's stable, someplace where you're going to be appreciated, someplace where you're going to be able to fit in. They love coming to the U.S. But as we make it harder for them to come, as we make our campuses more unstable, as things are challenged, and with COVID certainly, you run the risk of forcing people to think elsewhere. It's easy to get a faculty position having graduated from MIT. They will continue to come to the U.S. to go to our top schools. The challenge is those lower tier schools in the U.S., are they more attractive or less attractive than universities in China if you want to go back home to China to teach? And that's the calculus that's occurring right now. And that's the place where I am concerned.
I think I know the answer to the question after the briefing tonight, but it has been posed. There are those who write that the U.S. is in a, for that matter, not just the U.S., but the world is in a technology drought. That for the past 20 years, there have been really no major technology advances. And they would make their argument that the iPhone, which came along in 2004, 05, that was the last big one. Please refute that.
So I think Jeffrey Hinton might have something to say about that. He's a professor, I think, at University of Toronto, made the major breakthrough for AI. And I look at AI and where we are today, and we had multiple artificial intelligence winners. And I think, wow, man, we're actually someplace where we now have machine learning that is human accuracy at machine scale. That's incredible, right? That we actually have systems that are as good as people doing things, but now they're doing it at the speed of silicon instead of the speed of neurons. I think if you looked at the last 20 years of military innovation, there's been quite a bit. We've got high power lasers that we didn't have before at those scales. We've got rail guns. We've got sensors. There's quite a bit of innovation. I guess because I love looking backwards almost as much as I like looking forward, what I see is there were always interesting innovations coming along, and we're building on many of those. But that doesn't make them any less exciting. The breakthroughs in information materials and in thermal materials and in structural materials and in advanced manufacturing that it enables, these are just incredible. I mean, just look at 3D printing, advanced manufacturing 20 years ago versus today. It's almost unrecognizable today.
Well, let me follow up on that. Several weeks ago, former Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Bob Work spoke at a different seminar. And he talked with us about AI, machine learning, and he said, yeah, it's happening, but it's happening very, very slowly. And if there should be a crisis with the PRC over Taiwan by the end of this decade, which is, a lot of people think there would be, former Deputy Secretary Work said, AI and machine learning, they are not going to be there to help us by the end of this decade. Do you agree with that?
I have just tremendous respect for Secretary Work, having worked for him and follow his writings and talk to him. I would respectfully disagree. I think our challenge isn't that the AI won't be ready, but it's that adoption. And what cultural barriers are we going to put in place of artificial intelligence that perhaps others won't? And so a colleague wrote a book called The Army of None. And he asked me in the book about AI and our adoption of it. And I said, well, is today December 6th or December 8th? Because if it's December 6th, then we're completely against unrestricted submarine warfare. And we would never use AI as a lethal autonomous weapons system. It would be unethical. If it's December 8th, then we've executed our first war order to our submarine force to execute unrestricted submarine warfare, and we've unleashed our lethal autonomous weapons systems. And so you should never, I think Bob is mistaking willingness to do something versus ability to do something.
You might elaborate a bit on unrestricted submarine warfare.
So from the Lusitania incident in 1916, where a German U-boat sank a British luxury liner full of civilians and also some British military goods, killing at a large loss of life of British civilians, the U.S. was opposed to what was called unrestricted submarine warfare. That is, you could not sink a vessel without surfacing, giving the vessel time to unload its occupants into lifeboats. The Germans realized this was unworkable from a warfare perspective and posted notices that they were going to be executing unrestricted submarine warfare. World War I ended, and all the way to December 7th, 1941, we were opposed to the concept of sinking things on the open seas without providing notification. And we complained about the Germans before we joined World War II about this. Pearl Harbor occurred. We realized we had a problem. And the first order from the U.S. submarine commander in the Pacific to his fleet was execute unrestricted submarine warfare. And my feeling about AI is it's the same thing. We're not going to go do things that would require lethal autonomous weapon systems without having long thought about it and without a crisis moment. And I think our AI systems are more than sufficiently competent to be with us in the fight, with or without that restriction removed. There's lots of things you can do with an unmanned system, even if it's not carrying a weapon. And I think we could do that. It's just a matter of will.
And the unrestricted warfare warfare destroy the Japanese
Oh.
economy?
Yeah, and so the Japanese were really reliant on their sea lanes to, at the time, Java, the Dutch Indies, where they were receiving all their oil because they had no natural resources. And we went and sank their tankers and basically shut their economy down through submarine warfare. I think that the concept of fait accompli warfare really just goes back to this, I've done something, now what are you going to do about it? And so I have children, so I think about the swinging of hands in the back seat. So now what are you going to do? I just smacked you, I double dare you to smack me. Well, this is equivalent of in international relations where you invade a portion of a country and then you double dare somebody to come in to take you out. The normal U.S. way of fighting is to build up a coalition of forces in nearby locations, spend the time preparing for the big fight, and then moving in and doing it. And I think Gulf War I and the subsequent battles in Iraq, there's no one better at rolling in a big way and taking things out. But if it takes 6 months and that much effort to stop something, are we going to do it? And so fait accompli warfare basically double dares you to do something about it. Well, if you want to counteract that, you have to be quick. And I think that's where you see the rise of hypersonic weapon systems. The reason for hypersonic systems is so that you can react quickly with force from afar. And with precision-guided systems, so now you have good understanding of where it's going to hit. So you don't need as many as you would have needed 20, 50 years ago. Now you can actually quickly react if you want to a threat. And that's what you're seeing is the reason we're focused on hypersonics as a nation, the reason we're focused on this hyper-aware, so we know exactly where things are, so we can go marshal our forces against them. And then this allows you to use one to go after a target instead of many, which then allows you to prosecute that many more targets quickly. So, how do hypersonic missiles affect the control of the South China Sea? Obviously, if we can provide quick reaction into the South China Sea from afar, then we don't have to have force in theater. We can do that from further out. We can react quickly that way. I think that's just now you're into a weapon count. But I think that a hypersonic system just allows you to have further range and to have quicker reaction.
The question is, public education in the U.S. is not keeping up with science progress. How does this impact our military in the future?
Well, it's tough. I'm a product of public school education, and I remind myself of that every day as I struggle. But I think that the challenge for the military is you're not getting the ones that go to college and go off to do other jobs. If it's like a sand chart of people in the country, you're mining a very narrow seam of people from the inner cities and people from the rural Americas for your enlisted force, where the majority of our people are. And the school systems are failing them. And so the military is spending quite a bit, and I helped out on Navy STEM, quite a bit of remedial training at boot camp, where we're providing them with learning assistance, personalized learning assistant. You can take somebody with a 3rd grade reading level at the beginning of boot camp, and you can get them to 10th grade with that tool. And we're having to do that. And I think companies are having the same challenge, where we're having to teach our employees more and more that we take for granted. And I think the trends are only going to continue. Those kinds of trends take a long time to erase. I will give a plug for Dean Kamen and FIRST Robotics. Dean Kamen has single-handedly, or with his large team, if you don't know about FIRST Robotics, it's a high school and junior high school robotics competitions. He has eliminated the need to search for mechanical engineers. We need the same thing in computer science, but he has fixed our mechanical engineering gap single-handedly. Done. Thank you. Great questions, Schuette.